What did you make of the coordinated strikes from the US, UK, and France?
I would first say that this is a limited strike. It is a signal that is given to Syria and Russia, but it is a signal given with a forewarning to Russia. They moved their assets, the Iranians did too, and the buildup with air tankers and surveillance aircraft and so on has been going on for 3 days, so everybody could see this coming. Now, the important element is that the signal was given that chemical weapons, this is too far, this is the red line, and this time the red line has been implemented. It's now time to move to the diplomatic phase, and I would say this can be done in two ways, in my view. One is that Donald Tusk should convene this weekend the European Council to reconcile, if you want, the various positions of the European countries. Of course, you have two permanent members, France and the UK, and these are the two permanent members of the Security Council, and these are the two with operational capabilities. But you have a host of different positions from other member states. Supportive, like Germany, but not involved. Some of them are silent, others are neutral. So you need to put Europe back in the picture. And there is a Syria conference in Brussels next week, which is also an occasion to discuss in more details. And then, of course, the issue should go back as soon as possible to the Security Council, because this is not a conflict between three permanent members, US, France, UK, against a fourth one, Russia, let alone the fifth one, China. It is a fight against a brutal regime. And this is what should be discussed, the political transition, the arrangements, security in the north of Syria, etc.
Just want to ask you, as you mentioned at the top of your response there, this a limited and targeted strike, Russia given warning ahead of time. How effective could these strikes be? We talk about a red line, a line being drawn in the sand. How effective could these strikes be if they were warned ahead of time? Last year, we saw the Americans strike an airfield. The next day, it was operational. Is this strategy going to make Bashar al-Assad stop using chemical weapons?
Well, not sure, obviously. The conflict here is between the effect of surprise and the deconfliction, as they say in the military. That is the avoidance of conflict, direct conflict between US and allies and Russia. So you have to have some sort of prior warning. But the importance of these strikes is primarily political more than technical. Assad will surely have moved his chemical stockpile somewhere else, or at least in part. Assad is surely ready to rekindle the Islamic State, for example, because this is what he's done in the beginning. He freed some people from the Sednaya jail to create the Islamic State. So this is a strategy of the Assad clan, and we have to make sure this doesn't happen again. This is a reason also for the US Special Forces, together with some French and British, to stay north and east of the Euphrates River, because this is where they can make sure that Islamic State doesn't start again its operation. And by the same token, contrary to the view in Ankara, they are using the Syrian Kurdish forces, but they're also controlling them.
And Mr. Pierini, draw on your professional experience for us as a diplomat. We've seen a lot of skepticism whether or not the United Nations can lead to a ceasefire, to a resolution against the Syrian regime. How do you put two sides that seem unwilling to compromise, on one, the US, the UK, and France, on the other side, Russia, and as you mentioned, at times, China? How do you reconcile those positions to lead to meaningful change on the ground for the civilians caught in the crossfire?
Well, general remark, first of all, is that the Syrian war will remain as the example of the most cynical event in this century. The issue here is that for 2.5 years now, you have had a military intervention of Russia in Syria. Of course, the primary objective was to rescue the Assad regime at the point when it was crumbling in September 2015. That has been done, obviously, and the Assad regime is now protected heavily by the Russians. But at the same time, there were other objectives, as described by Mr. Putin himself in the General Assembly meeting of September 2015, which is basically to have a permanent presence in the Middle East, to be an influential force there with military bases, and also to be back at the table where the world order is discussed. So this is not going to go away. The state of Syria will remain. Assad or not Assad is a secondary question. And Russia will remain in the Middle East. So we want to make sure that we are moving now to a direct resolution of the main issues. One is to have a functioning state in Syria with some sort of acceptance of the minorities, including the Kurdish minority. We have to help Turkey come out of its strange position where it's torn between a long-standing alliance, NATO, and an alliance of convenience, more recent, with Russia and Iran. It is some sort of bipolarity, if you want, which is not sustainable in the long term. There is, of course, a lot of domestic politics in Turkey involved in this, but guarantees for the security of the border between Turkey and Syria are important. None of this is going to be resolved by bombastic tweets and cruise missiles, obviously. You need to sit at a table, and this is where Secretary General Guterres could come in. But prior to that, as I said, we need a strong, united European position. And this is not just a military issue, it is a diplomatic issue.
And it's not just a European issue as well. On the other side of the Atlantic, we have Donald Trump in the White House, many criticizing him for having an unclear policy in Syria. Just today, we heard what seemed to be a confliction again, the U.S. president saying the U.S. is willing to have a continued, sustained effort until Assad stops using chemical weapons. Moments later, as Defense Secretary Jim Mattis making it sound like this is a one-off. If we're going to have a roadmap to a diplomatic solution, how likely will it be when we don't even know if the Trump administration is on the same page with its own officials?
Well, this is more than 15 months now that we have President Trump and his very peculiar way of operating. I would simply observe that in the past few days, you've had very, very unusual things, such as the President of the United States announcing on Twitter strikes, which is very odd, obviously. But at the same time, the Pentagon and the commanding officers there and the Secretary of Defense prevailed. They ran the operation the way they wanted. They operated some sort of deconfliction with the Russians, which is reasonable. So although we're all impressed on a daily basis by Donald Trump's tweets, we have a functioning state in Washington, and we have to trust that it will continue to function.
All right. Thank you. Marc Pierini, former EU ambassador, speaking from Brussels.